certainly have fears that there is a serial killer at loose in Perth.
Sarah Spears, Jane Rimmer, Ciara Glennon.
And every time you saw a young girl walking by, you think, oh God, is she going to be the next victim?
Now, one man stands accused.
If police are right and Edwards is the Claremont serial killer, he's been hiding in plain sight for 20 years.
Today, the court heard of a chink in the UK chain. For a week, it was thought crucial DNA exhibits were missing. Hi everyone, welcome to Day 50. Natalie, Tim and Alison with you. Now, this would have been a very nervous time.
Yes, I would imagine it would be. They hadn't done the testing and didn't know the results by this time on the fingernails, obviously, so they didn't really know what they had at the time. But what they did know is that it was a huge case in Western Australia that they'd been specifically asked to work on, and they were being brought in for their expertise and professionalism. But as we heard today, for a week or thereabouts, some of the exhibits, and they turned out to be some of the crucial exhibits, the fingernail exhibits that had gone over, became separated from the whole package of material that went over to the UK. And then when some of that material was taken out of what FSS referred to as their dry storage, and there was confusion because some of the numbers on the bag weren't in the bag. And so this is AGM 40, 46, 48, the fingernails. But it turned out what had happened was when they had been received in London, the FSS operative there had taken it upon himself to separate them out between the ones that would go into dry storage and the ones that would go into cold storage. They used a fridge and a freezer in London. And then when they arrived in Birmingham, that's where they were stored. Most were stored in the dry storage, but the fingernails went into cold storage. And so there was a little bit of panic, I think we can safely say that. But then the operatives searched them out, realised what had happened, and they were there. And so at the end of the day, they were all the exhibits were always in FSS's custody, under lock and key, secure, and present. And then, as we know, after they were found, they were tested eventually, and the results were what they were, as was relayed earlier in the week.
So although they couldn't find them for the week, at the end of the day, they hadn't gone walkabout. It's not like they had been taken to a place where they could have been tampered with or touched in any way.
Yeah.
And we're going to be hearing a little bit more about that next week, I think, aren't we, with another maybe video link to the UK.
Yes, another late night sitting, which we'll look forward to.
Shore up something that she's already got.
Lots of late night sittings now.
And to be fair to FSS, it was because all their processes that they had put in place, the labelling, the couriers that they used, the numbering, that they were able to find them pretty rapidly after this slight communication breakdown emerged, which is why today it was a thing.
Very thoroughly.
It was a thing,
Yeah.
and it was outlined very thoroughly.
Yeah.
And it was not so much as a thing because Mr. Jovich didn't even want to cross-examine the witness about it, because we heard all this through statements that were read in today. So obviously on the defence side, I'm sure they would have had a close look at it, but at the end of the day, and today was day 50, at the end of this day, we didn't hear any more questioning about it because Mr. Jovich said he didn't need to ask any questions about it.
It was very detailed, and I think probably
very.
anybody that's touched any of this, from the mail room to the receptionist to the courier, it's all been documented and itemised and checked, ticked off and signed off.
Yeah.
And as we've
a
talked
true
about,
journey, as we talk about in the true sense of the word.
Absolutely.
And it's really, like you've said many, many times, this is just showing the chain of possession and continuity.
Yeah, continuity, the C word, that's the key word, Nat. And that's why we heard about all this stuff, and that's why we've been hearing about it all week, because the prosecution are absolutely desperate to show that these fingernail exhibits were never out of anyone's sight, or no one never knew where they were at any one point. And if they didn't know where they were, which we found out today they didn't for a few days, they were still secure and unable to be tampered with or contaminated in any way, really.
And even, as you probably talked about yesterday, as the judge is querying sometimes irrelevance or duplication of documents, she's saying, I'm covering every base because I'm not quite sure what's going to come up and being thrown at me. So that's what she's doing, because sometimes he's saying, well, I've already got copies of this, and haven't I, this is another duplicate or triplicate
or
whatever. She's saying you're getting the whole lot. And we're getting the whole lot as well.
We are, yeah.
And despite the detail, you were saying to me earlier, Ali, that people are still so incredibly engrossed in this trial, and you even bumped into a couple of unexpected visitors in court this week.
Yes, and they were one of them in particular, Dr. John Sankin, who is a qualified psychiatrist, actually owned the two venues which were at the centre of all of this. That's Club Bayview and the Conti Hotel. He still owns, I understand, the one in St Quentin's Avenue. And he was there to see what he'd been reading. He was trying to follow up, and he was wanting to know whether a right-handed or a left-handed, I don't know what he was looking into that, but he was very, very interested. And he was talking too about the drop-off in business. He said the fear didn't really set in after the first two victims, but after Ciara Glennon, he noticed a huge drop-off, and everybody was really quite fearful about just walking around the streets of Claremont, certainly getting into a taxi. So he's going to come back and have another look as well, along with another prominent nightclub owner who business was affected as well.
And correct me if I'm right, didn't the owners of the hotel actually put up part of the reward or their own reward?
They did at one stage, yes.
Which is obviously speaks volumes of how concerned and what they were about the community safety and being involved in the investigation.
Well, it's thanks to them that the cameras were there that didn't need to be, and they were mainly there to protect their own interests, like brawls or overcrowding and so forth. So the vision that we've seen has all been from their own personal security cameras for the clubs.
Well, there would have been nothing worse for them than to know that, after these people who are visiting their clubs are disappearing.
Exactly.
That would have been a terrible thing.
That would have been it's your worst nightmare as a publican, isn't it?
That's right.
Your safety and happiness of your patrons are why you're in the business in the first place. And then if they start going missing, then not only is it impact on business, but it's just the impact on the whole city. And we're still talking about it, nearly 30 years later. So the impact on the city is still being felt.
Sense of, I wonder if there was almost this sense of responsibility and almost this guilt factor, which I'm sure lots of different people have felt in various different ways, whether it be a cabbie who didn't quite get there in time to pick someone up or what have you. It would have been a terrible time for them, and I imagine they would still be grappling with that.
Well, even so that he said a lot of the incidents that happen are when they've left the club, but they still hark back to the club where they were. And, of course, these were after they'd left. And a recent one where a male was abducted, he said that just really threw back onto the club because it was where the guy was drugged. He said no, it's been proven it was outside, but it's still a throwback. So he's just looking carefully, and as I said, he was involved and has been for the last very much so with the police. Yeah.
We've had a few questions about how Edwards could be convicted of Sarah's murder given her body's never been discovered. And this is a very good question today in light of a bombshell really today in a very high-profile murder conviction in Perth, which was today quashed.
Yeah, that's right, Nat. So we seem to be talking a lot about other cold cases this week. Yes. We raised Gerard Ross yesterday, and this is the case of Hayley Dodd, who was another young lady who disappeared, and her body has never been found, much like Sarah's. There was a very high-profile trial in Western Australia over the last 2 years. There was a conviction in that, but today we learned through the Court of Appeal that that conviction was quashed, and there will be a retrial. But the relation to Claremont, obviously, is, as I've mentioned, Hayley's body was never found, and Sarah's body's never been found. And it raises an overarching question, I suppose, of the reliability and the possibility of convictions for murder when there's no body to as evidence or has been discovered. They are rare. They're not unprecedented, as the Dodd case showed. It is possible to get a conviction, but this one today has been overturned for various reasons. And the question about Sarah's, we've covered it before, but it is still very interesting because as long as this trial has gone on, you still don't feel you've heard that much about the case.
Well, they don't know the
Ciara's
crime.
case
Yeah.
in terms of her murder case, because
No crime scene.
No crime scene at all.
Nobody.
No forensic evidence to go on, and so as we said right at the start of the podcast, Ciara's charge came later than Jane and Ciara's, so they were joined together. It's obviously become 3 murder trials in one, but the evidence going towards Ciara's murder is obviously a lot less in scope and size than Ciara's and Jane's because of the lack of forensic evidence. So it's a purely circumstantial case, and those circumstances include obviously the scream evidence that we heard, the fact that Ciara went missing first, but in very similar circumstances to Jane and Ciara, and the likelihood of a different person having committed that crime as compared to Jane and Ciara, given all the similarities, geographical and timeline, weekend, late at night, all those type of things. So it is an interesting question, and it's one that won't really come together until right at the end of the case, when we close it, or when Miss Barbara Gallo closes the prosecution case, and then she will revisit and reiterate and expand hugely on her opening, which basically said, what are the chances? What are the chances of a different person having committed this crime, Ciara's crime, given all the similarities? Now, obviously, none of them are proved yet. They're all still allegations, but that is her reasoning as to why there could only be one person, and obviously that was the premise that the police worked on for all those years. We also do know from evidence for the last couple of days that there were a number of persons of interest in Claremont. That was revealed, confirmed today, revealed in the documents. They had persons of interest, persons plural, and they had samples from those persons to take with them to the UK, particularly to compare the hairs. It was quite interesting. Right at the end of the day today, Justice Hall raised this question in a completely different context, because some of the items of evidence that were taken over to the UK were obviously listed alongside the Claremont items, but those items had been redacted from the documents that were shown in open court for various reasons. One, because they're nothing to do with this case, so the judge doesn't need to consider them. And as we touched on yesterday, the police in the Ross case, which is an open, ongoing, high-profile murder investigation in Western Australia, were and still are very sensitive about details of what they have in evidence getting out into the public for all the same reasons that we've talked about previously, particularly with John Townsend a couple of weeks ago when he talked about, you don't want to tip off potential suspects of what you've got. But Justice Hall asked the question, well, is there any chance that those exhibits that went, the Operation Ambrose exhibits, the Ross exhibits, which we now know went to the UK, is there any chance that they played a part in any possible contamination with the Claremont exhibits? And he asked that question to be sure and clear in his own mind that nothing is going to be made of that, and Mr. Jovich confirmed, no, there isn't. But the interesting bit was, for me anyway, that Justice Hall didn't know said he didn't know what the other case was. Now, I've reported on it quite extensively in the paper. Ali's reported on it. Other media have reported on it in Perth for the last couple of days. So that says to me that Justice Hall either regards our reporting as just completely insignificant.
Which would be right.
Which would probably be right. But I also sparked a little thought in my mind as whether he's deliberately avoiding media coverage of it. Now, he's obviously aware of it because he's mentioned it numerous times, and he knows the media interest, obviously, because we keep applying for exhibits every day. But it did spark a wonder in my mind of whether he's distancing himself from the outside noise, if you like,
the chatter,
and completely focusing, as he obviously would, but completely focusing on the evidence and nothing else. I'd be interested to know. I'll probably never find out, but I might ask Damien.
I
might ask Damien next week whether, in his opinion, that is something he thinks a judge in such a big case would do, just to completely ensure that there's no outside influence other than the evidence.
Well, I asked a policeman today who was sitting there. I said, "Well, why don't you just come out and say what the results of the Gerard Ross?" Because we did go into there was a hair or something, but they didn't want us to go any further than that.
No, well,
it was me, I guess.
It was up on the screen. We did see it. We did report it initially, and then, as I mentioned yesterday, there was some gentle, friendly communication within the police saying, "Look, we understand why you did it. We understand that it was up there, it's in the public domain, but if you wouldn't mind, it is an open investigation. Could you just be careful?" And that's always happy to listen to the WA Police Force. I never do anything to get myself on the wrong side of them.
I mean, just when you were talking about Justice Hall there, and I was thinking, well, yes, is this a conscious and deliberate effort to stay away from all the noise surrounding the case? Or could it simply be that the workload is that extreme that he is sitting in a bubble?
I don't think so. He's not sitting in a bubble in that way. Of course, he doesn't take any notice of media reports. He might glance at them and be aware of what we're reporting, but he can't, and he wouldn't. I think the time factor would probably be right as well, Nat. I mean, we sit 10 till 4:15, but I've seen Justice Hall arriving at court. He does read some articles, though, because he was quite offended by one of them that was in the West, wasn't he?
Well, that's true, yes, but we won't go there.
But also, to do another thing too, no family have been there, but Bradley Edwards' parents are there every day.
Yes, they are. Mm-hmm. And have been.
Yep.
They weren't there for the first week, I would maybe say, and that was full on. That was the media circus in full effect. But since then, they have been there every day, faithfully, still interacting, non-verbally with him in court, and they eat their lunch at the cafe downstairs. We've mentioned the cafe. I'll give Les another shout out because he's been such a support to us all. To be fair, Les has said to me that they seem just like another couple just going through a horrible experience, as we've talked about so many times with members of the victims' families. I mean, accused families sometimes get forgotten a little bit, I suppose, in the whole circus drama of it. But they would be going through a horrendous ordeal as well as other members of Mr. Edwards' family. Obviously, what he's accused of is heinous, but he is just accused of it. He's not been convicted of anything now, and obviously his mum and dad haven't been accused of anything and probably never will be. So,
are they making small talk with others outside the court, or are they really sticking to themselves?
They stick to themselves. Nobody approaches them. They have sometimes, I think her sister was with them the other day, and maybe another member of the family.
They do have some supporters with them on some days, and some days they're there together supporting each other. But
a lot don't know who they are.
As we talked about yesterday, I think everyone has tried to be as respectful as they can within the process, and the members of the public, you've got to say, have been on their absolute best behaviour. There's only been a couple of little incidents outside the court, which is again sort of quite remarkable in itself, given the amount of people that have come and the emotional evidence that they've been listening to.
This leads me to the many, many questions we get about the actual court process, and I imagine for some people that it sounds like it might be a little bit daunting, but it is a relatively straightforward process, and I might just get the two of you to talk us through how it works in a very basic logistic sense, from walking through the front door, when you go through security, what happens there? Can you leave the court in the middle of a court sitting? Can you just talk to us about how we would get into the court and sit in there for a day?
Yeah. I mean, it is every courtroom, unless there's an express order by a judge or a magistrate, is open to the public. Anyone can go into any court they like, as long as they're properly attired and respect the process. And this trial, regardless of its size and scope, is like any other trial. So the court itself is in the District Court building on Hay Street in Perth. Even though it is a Supreme Court hearing. That is purely for logistical purposes. The size of the court they needed for this scope, there was only one that was available or that could be used for this, and that's in the District Court building. Trial proceedings start at 10 o'clock every morning unless there's a delay or a late sitting, which we've had this week. They go till 1 o'clock. There's a break, mid-morning tea break at about 11:15, 11:30, lunch 1 till 2:15, and then back for another 2 hours in the afternoon, finishing around 4:15. Anyone can attend, anyone can go. It's Court 72, it's on the top floor of the District Court building. But as I say, there's a few rules. You've got to be properly attired, you've got to turn your phones off, no sunglasses on your head, no caps.
No note taking. I don't think they can take notes.
Yeah, well, that's correct. No note taking unless you're an accredited person of the media or you've been given prior permission. There's lots of seating. There's seats for up to about 80 people. You can sit there. The screens are there, so you can see the evidence. You've obviously got to be quiet. You've obviously got to be respectful. But other than that, anyone can come. As Alison's mentioned, the crowds, if you want to put it that way, have died down, so there's no problem with seating. There was some overflow court facilities set up for the first couple of weeks, but they won't be used now. I wouldn't have thought until maybe right at the end of the trial when it might get busy, and then certainly for the day of the verdict, that would be standing room only, I would have thought.
And there's obviously groups of students coming in, because this morning there was quite a big group of students coming in. They stay maybe for half an hour or so and then quietly go out.
Yeah, no metal objects in court. You do have to go through a security scanner at the front of court for obvious reasons. All the security staff are very friendly, very professional, unless you do the right thing, and then they can flex a little bit. And then the media benches, the two front rows, there's some reserved for families on both sides of victims and of Mr. Edwards. There's media rows at the front, which are clearly marked with little desks, so we can do our note taking. But other than that, anyone is free to come. Even my mum paid a visit yesterday. She was interested. She hasn't seen much of me in the last few weeks, so she knew I'd be there. So she'd never been in a courtroom before, so it was all a bit of an eye opener to her, as it has been to dozens and hundreds of people, I suppose, who probably never think they would step into a court. But this case has attracted interest like no other.
It's a little bit concerning that when your mum wants to see you, she actually has to go to court to do that now.
Well, I was very happy to see her, and we had a nice lunch. Thanks, Les. So it was. But I mean, she hears about it from various
from
podcasts and from phone calls, but she wanted to see for herself. So it was nice to see her.
Is there any other rules that people need to follow? Do they need to bow to the judge when they step inside the courtroom?
Yeah, there is a little bit of that. So you have to stand when the judge enters, and there is a little bow, just as a show of respect to the court. But it's not wigs. It's not there are gowns, but they're not the huge red gowns that someone might. There's no gavel or anything like that. It's quite a modern, up-to-date process. We haven't had wigs in Western Australia for about 15 years now, Ali, I don't think. But yeah, as Justice Hall said himself on the first day, it's a formal process. It's not a social process, and so there are
serious. Yes, that's quite.
And you couldn't get more serious, really, than the allegations that are being heard.
That's right. Well, as we mentioned yesterday, if you are interested in following up on the Gerard Ross case, or if you're interested in reading more about the Hayley Dodd case that we've mentioned today, you can find that on thewest.com.au. And your mum will see you back in court on Monday, Tim. We'll see you both back in court on Monday. That brings us to the end of week 11 of the trial. So Monday, that's day 51. It'll be a slightly longer sitting than usual. Is that right?
Yes, we think so. So there's been some new evidence that's been asked to be adduced by the prosecution, which there's just a couple of other forensic witnesses, just to tie up a few loose ends there. And one of those is again from the UK. So a room will be being booked over the weekend. We're going to start at normal time, have a longer break, and then go a little bit longer into the night. She's another FSS person who worked on these crucial low copy number runs, so she will give her evidence, and then we think possibly later in the week we might get to some of the police officers that had to be deferred yesterday, but Ms. Barbagallo said we've got at least another 2 weeks of DNA evidence to come, which the bulk of which you would think would be Dr. Whitaker, the boss man in FSS. Then we might have a little break, we think. There was some talk from Mr. Jovic over the last couple of days that he might need a couple of days just to get all his ducks in a row before the fibre evidence begins in earnest. But we're looking then maybe in the second week of March that might get up and going in full effect. That's going to go for weeks, if not over a month, I would have thought, and then we get into DNA probabilities. There'll be some other things, and then the investigation itself. So that's when we think we will start to hear from some of the most senior and long-serving macro investigators. And we've also been told that the very last piece of evidence we will see will be Mr. Edwards' 6.5 hour interview with police, which will be the first time that we've ever heard anything said by him in public about these allegations against him.
So like the prosecutors, you mean we're all in a guessing game as to what's coming up next?
It is a little bit. We're getting a little bit of a roadmap and feeling our way, but as we've seen this week, speed humps do hit, roadblocks do occur. And it was day 50 today, and it was pretty underwhelming, to be honest, just to get a few witnesses read in. But yeah, it rolls on and rolls on and rolls on.
As Justice Hall said yesterday, it's a very difficult case.
And a very long time.
Yes.
Well, we will have all those details for you. We hope we can have your company next week for Claremont in Conversation. Until then, have a good weekend.
This podcast was produced by Kate Ryan and Alicia Preedy and recorded in the studios of 7 West Media. Audio files were provided from the archives of the 7 Network and the West Australian. Sign up for daily emails and all the latest on the Claremont trial at thewest.com.au.
Enjoying this podcast? If the story behind the headline matters to you, then you can count on thewest.com.au to deliver. For more on Claremont the trial, follow the live blog, watch the nightly news updates, and sign up for daily email updates at thewest.com.au. Subscribe now for just $1 a day at thewest.com.au.